Hello, folks. I'm Nick Bernardo, your host of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. If you're east of the Rocky Mountains here in the U.S., good afternoon. Good morning to those out west, and hello to anyone joining us from the far corners of the earth or watching online in the future. Today is Wednesday, March 26, 2025. This series is brought to you by MyGovWatch. With a curated white glove approach, MyGovWatch delivers leads in more than 200 industries at double the rate of free government tools and at a fraction of the cost of legacy websites. Big government contracts do not start with a solicitation, but all roads lead to one. And your budget for hearing about RFPs does not have to be thousands of dollars per year. Start your 14-day free trial today. And today, folks, I'm very excited to tell you we have not one, but two expert federal GovCon attorneys from the firm Koprince, McCall Pottroff, Shane McCall and Annie Birney. Welcome, folks. How are you?
Thank you. Good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here, Nick. Good to see you again.
Always good to see you guys from the firm jump on. It's always a good time. So, folks, Shane is an equity partner at Koprince, McCall Pottroff, and editor of the website smallgovcon.com with a law degree from the University of Kansas. Shane helps businesses navigate the thicket of federal government contracting with a focus on issues affecting small businesses. Shane excels in drafting both transactional and litigation documents and advising clients on FAR and SBA contracting rules, skills that come in handy in solving the riddles of government contracting. Shane gets involved in bid protests, size and status protests, mentor-protege agreements, JV agreements, operating agreements, subcontracts, teaming, and that's just to name a few. And most interestingly, I've been asking our co-hosts for little tidbits or random facts, if you will. Shane once served in the Peace Corps in Jamaica and, amazingly, even as an outdoorsman, has never broken a single bone. And I see you're seated at a very comfortable desk setting, Shane. We're going to make sure that you're safe during this session, right?
Thank you.
And Annie, for her part, is an associate attorney with the firm. She is a recent graduate of the University of Kansas School of Law. While in law school, Annie assisted with the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program during the spring semester, providing Douglas County residents free federal and state tax preparation services. Additionally, Annie spent one semester participating in the Elder Law Field Placement Program, where she worked under the supervision of attorneys from Kansas Legal Services, assisting low-income seniors with document prep and estate planning. Annie, for her part, has a dog named Sir Bruiser. His name was inspired by Elle Wood's dog Bruiser in the movie Legally Blonde. Now, Annie, let me ask you, and this is maybe the most tongue-in-cheek question I've ever asked.
Let's hear it.
What's the connection between you and the movie Legally Blonde?
Well, she's blonde and she goes to law school.
That was a softball. That was a softball, and you
Keep them
knocked it
coming like
out of
that,
the
and
park.
I can hit them all day.
Yeah, you knocked it out of the park for anyone who hasn't seen the movie. So welcome, folks, and we try to keep these sessions. You know, GovCon, it can be exciting, it can be interesting as heck, but we also try to bring in a little bit more of a human element here. So I might ask you, what tells you that spring is in the air? For me, it's the smell of pollen and sneezing. And if I hear a golf club hit a golf ball, I know that spring is here. So I might ask you, what tells you that spring is in the air? Have you ever broken a bone, and how? I have a story. Maybe we'll get to it. Maybe we won't. And do you have a pet? And if so, how did you choose the name for your pet?
Would love to know.
So lots to talk about, folks. I will say just a couple of things in getting started here. This topic, what is happening with DOGE and how might it affect federal contracting? Obviously, it's a highly volatile conversation, or could be a volatile conversation. We're trying to play it straight, so to speak. So we're not looking for boos or cheers about DOGE, and you certainly won't hear boos or cheers from us. But we're just trying to help people figure out, like, what are the important questions that you need to be aware of if you're in federal contracting, if you want to be in federal contracting. So we're hoping to help you, as a takeaway, come up with important questions. We won't have all the answers on everything that will happen. We would just like you to follow our lead in terms of keeping it neutral politically. And also, these are audience-driven sessions. So we desperately want people to raise their hands, because I will certainly be asking Shane and Annie some questions here. and we'll be talking about some different things. But this is potentially thousands of dollars worth of free legal advice. And let me say, I know it's not really legal advice. I'll give that caveat. I know I'm supposed to do that. But here are two experts here and a third who knows a little something about federal, state, and local contracting. So I know there's only at least one person here who I've spoken with who may be interested in sharing something. Bradley, I know you're in the I think the RFID business. We'd love to hear from you. But now would be a good time, folks. Anyone who has a question, just raise your hand and I'll try to give you a heads up when we're about to bring you on. So, folks, I'm just going to start with something that a lot of people are talking about because everybody seems to be concerned about, like, what latitude does the federal government have to end contracts? So just as a starting off point, can you talk to us a little bit about what are the different mechanisms the federal government has to end a contract for convenience or for some other way? And like in the grand scheme of things, if there were 1,000 contracts, how many out of 1,000 can just be ended with the stroke of a pen? So anything you'd like to share about that?
Yeah, sure. I can give a few thoughts on that. Again, great to be here and glad to be talking about these topics. Well, yeah, so pretty much all federal contracts, there may be some exceptions here and there. They will include a termination for convenience clause, standard clause, and there's even, sometimes certain clauses get left out of contracts. There's a rule in federal procurement, basically kind of a judge-made rule that says if a very important provision is not included in contract, it can still be treated as if it is in there. And that termination for convenience might be one of those that's very important to the government, and they've included that in contracts for probably maybe it's a couple centuries now, or at least a century. And it basically says the government can terminate a contract for no reason at all, for any reason or no reason at all, and can do that kind of really quickly, almost at a moment's notice. Now they do have to pay the contractor the costs of what they've incurred so far, and then costs to kind of wind things down and put together some kind of closing the contract, that sort of thing. But it is a very common clause. I've seen it in pretty much every contract that we've dealt with. Again, there may be some exceptions here and there, but it's a very common thing that's included on almost all federal contracts.
Well, and it's interesting because I think there's a lot of trepidation around folks who do have a federal contract already, especially if they feel that the nature of what they're doing may be controversial. Maybe it isn't, but it's my understanding that contractors do have some mechanisms to challenge different things that are happening with federal contracts. Is there a way to challenge the ending of a contract, or can contractors only challenge things assuming a contract is ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, there is, if someone has the resources and the willingness, you can challenge even a termination of convenience. And the clause is pretty straightforward. It basically says the government can terminate for convenience, but then again, there's avenues for challenging these things. Typically, um, you would challenge it at the contracting officer level, and then they'll probably, maybe not agree with you. You basically have to almost challenge it, saying that the government took its action in bad faith, which is one of those legal terms that's very hard to define. It's kind of like when you see it. And there's a lot. I will say this: there's quite a few cases out there, decisions where someone's tried to challenge government actions and saying it lacks bad faith. And if it really rises to an egregious level, the um, the judge in some cases, or there's this there's an appeal board called the Boards of Contract Appeals that also has a judge sitting there. And then there's the Court of Federal Claims that has a judge sitting there that will review these things. And you got different options. It's not something you want to do on a drop of a hat because it's a pretty involved process. But in the right situation, it could be effective. It could be something to at least consider. And you can say, actually, the government didn't have a good reason. Um, and so a bad reason might be, um, bias or just they really hated a certain contractor. But you'd almost have to find a smoking gun that said that. But as to Nick's question, you can challenge it. And I think if you read through all those cases, and we've read through a lot of them, you're going to see most of the time it's very hard to prove the government did that. But what I think is there's some instances out there where the government doesn't want a published decision saying they acted in bad faith. So they may settle those cases so there's never any public record of it in some egregious situations.
Yeah, I had talked to Shane about that too because when I first started, he's like, "Can you give me some case law on this?" And it all seems obviously favored toward the government, and he was the one who had pointed out, well, they're not going to want to have this precedence that all these other contractors can go and use against them in court too. But just because there's not precedence or favorable case law, like Shane said, that doesn't mean it never happened and they could have settled. So it's still, if you feel like you have a good basis to argue it, it's worth pursuing if it's, a lot of money's worth or willing to put the time in as well. But the first step I feel like for sure is talking to your CO and then also reading your contract and seeing what termination clause applies to your specific contract because they kind of differ in that way too, of what the recovery cost and procedures after can be.
Really
Good point.
interesting to hear some of the rules around this. As long as I've been around federal contracting, and particularly when someone from your firm is on with us, there's always something I haven't heard before, didn't know before. So we're certainly in that arena now. We did a session of MyGovWatch Live back in November, and there might be a few of you who were with us then. By the way, folks, now is the time to raise your hand. We're looking for people who want to ask specific questions. Priscilla, I see your question. We're going to come to you momentarily. If you keep your hand up, we did a session in November, and what we wanted to do immediately after the election was like set people's minds at ease about federal contracting as a whole, right? Obviously, there's a lot that's happening at the individual contract level that maybe can't be stopped if something's being terminated. But we looked at the numbers from the second Obama term into Trump 1 into Biden, and we looked at multiple numbers. And this is all out on YouTube. You can go look at the screens that we showed on this and the graphs, and they're fascinating. For as much as we're hearing from Washington about cutting fraud, waste, and abuse, the story from Obama into Trump 1 into Biden was one of contracting growth. So overall dollars spent went up. Contracted dollars as a percentage of overall dollars went up. DOD spending went up. Even small business spending went up in that 4-year period. So I think the misconception, and I'm wondering if what you all think about this. Are you hearing from your clients things like this? But we're hearing things that lead us that there's a misconception that federal contracting will significantly shrink as a result of this administration. We do know that anything that's controversial or that has been announced as controversial is certainly something that could be in jeopardy. But it would be hard for me to believe that a cleaning contract or to clean the marble floors of the entranceway to the Supreme Court, it would be hard for me to imagine that that's going anywhere. Something that's purely run of the mill, that's not controversial. And I just like to make that point to people because it just, we see it in the numbers that they're still letting out like tons of contracts every week and every month. And I wonder if you're getting any questions like that from people who are contacting you.
Uh, well, we're seeing some of our clients and people, prospective clients, people we're talking to, talking about some of those categories that are being reduced, and that would be things like USAID, um, DEI type contracts. I've also seen consulting contracts that have been talked a lot about in the administration as being ones that are going to be reduced. But like Nick is saying, still leaves, you know, the vast majority of those contracts that are still out there. So things like IT services, we have a lot of clients that work in those areas. And yeah, that would be like facility services like Nick is talking about. Um, I have seen reports of reducing some of the leases and things like that. But there's not really, that may mean kind of moving things around. There's also been kind of a return to work move, so that would seem to indicate there's going to be more leases in some areas and less in some areas. Maybe moving them geographically, that's also been talked about in the kind of announcements and predictions from within the administration, moving things out of Washington and moving them to other places. Even I was looking at the SBA's website because we do a lot with small business clients and small business regulations, and they've talked about moving some of their offices out of DC and moving those to other places. So that really wouldn't, the overall numbers would kind of stay the same, but it'd be a change geographically. And so those are some of the areas that I'm thinking of as to where things could be moving. I don't know.
Yeah, and it just seems like some things that are changing or being reduced or being eliminated, they're sort of happening intuitively based on what we know this administration believes. I guess there could still be some surprises, things that people haven't brought up yet, but it just feels like, if you're in the consulting arena or DEI or real estate, definitely you should be thinking like, is my contracting vehicle going to be around in 12 months? So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, but Priscilla has joined us. Priscilla, we just need your audio. Welcome, Priscilla, to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where are you joining us from?
So I'm a business consultant. I work with a lot of businesses, helping them get government contracts. Currently, I'm working with the company Micro One, which is a huge AI company here in Silicon Valley, and we're looking to procure contracts with the government. This time, for some reason, things have really changed when it comes to getting a contract with the government. So how we used to do it and how it's being done now are two completely different things, because the government has shut down so many departments. So my question moving forward is, how are these changes going to affect SAM's, that the government website, or are they going to affect it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. And I will just put an add-on question to that, because I've been wondering, like, for example, does the government of El Salvador have an account on SAM.gov to detain people? I don't know. Is there some emergency provision to do that? So that's just like an add-on question. So Shane or Annie, have you heard anything? I certainly have not, about whether or not SAM.gov will continue to be the vehicle as a clearinghouse for where people must be represented in order to do any business with the government. I suspect that won't change because it's convenient and it involves technology. And even though it's not perfect, it functions. I wonder what you all think.
I also have not heard about that yet. So Shane, have you?
No, I haven't heard any changes or predictions on that. I mean, it does make me think of um the kind of movement towards consolidating procurement within GSA. And since GSA runs SAM, you kind of, maybe that seems to be a movement towards keeping things within GSA. So maybe they'll move more stuff into SAM if there is more stuff that can be moved there. Yeah, but I haven't heard any plans for revamping it or changing anything. Similarly, kind of with USA spending, I haven't really heard anything about that being kind of like targets for reorganizing things. So I would, yeah, kind of think it's going to stay there, but things could change in the future.
Yeah, I would add this, Priscilla. You could say a lot of what you would like to say about what's happening in DC with DOGE and Musk and everything there. But I think it would be hard to argue. It would be hard to argue that DOGE is not interested in technology. They're highly interested in technology. And if we think they're interested in improvements in technology, I would think that improving SAM.gov or extending it even would be viewed as a positive thing, right? And this is just me reading the tea leaves. I certainly haven't had anyone tell me that, but it's an existing government system. It serves a useful function. And it's really pretty good, right, at announcing contracts, at being a clearinghouse for contractor information. So I suspect that, all things being equal, I suspect that system should get better if they ever make it a point to focus on it. What are your thoughts?
Well, my I guess big question would be everything's now is being funneled directly through SAMs. And it used to not be like that. I could go through certain government platforms and get what I wanted for my client. Now I'm being directed directly through SAMs, and I have to go through the steps that everybody else takes. And after doing, how it is when you do something over a period of time, you learn little ways of getting in through the back door. Well, that's what happened. Now that back door's been shut. Now I'm not against DOGE. I agree with doing 1,000%. As a matter of fact, I think government is way too big. It's way too bloated because some of the contracts that are being awarded to are, let's say, I'd say a good 70% of the contracts are being awarded to big businesses and not the little guys. So I do think government was too bloated. I'm not against DOGE, but what I'm concerned with is those back doors that we used to be able to go through are now closed.
Priscilla, can you give us an example of something you used to be able to do that you can't do now?
Okay, if I was going to get some technology into, let's say, the U.S. Air Force, I was able to connect with, oh my goodness, I was able to connect with them directly on the USA website and go in that way. Now I have to wait, go through SAMs and follow the steps like everyone else.
Okay, so, and this is something I've not heard. So it sounds like there are specific procurements that used to not show up on SAM.gov, and I know that happens for various reasons. And you're
Yes.
seeing that more procurements are ending up on SAM.gov that maybe previously were not.
Or they're directing us to SAM. I don't necessarily see the ones that I'm looking for there, but they're telling us we have to start there and then wait to be contacted to move forward.
Okay, well, this may not be for you, Priscilla, but maybe for a lot of people listening. You must have a SAM account at a minimum
Yeah.
to do business with the federal government. And that's not for you, that's for like the rest of the audience, just so they know what we're talking about at SAM.gov. Shane or Annie, have you heard anything along these lines? Because I mean, it's music to my ears that they're pushing more things through SAM.gov because we help people find things from SAM.gov on our website with AI and making people see the right lead. So that would be a good thing for us. I'm just, that's, full transparency. That's a good thing for us. But are you hearing anything along these lines?
I personally haven't, but my first just thought in hearing that, it seems like they're trying to consolidate, but also maybe using it as a way to track the budgeting. They're all about reducing costs. If they're kind of trying to keep a better eye and having everything together, maybe is like a easier way to keep tabs on everything and the spending and what's being each procurement and everything.
That sounds logical.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some things that don't seem to be on SAM, but that would be, I'm thinking of GSA schedule that's still on like eBuy. I don't know if I mean, they just, you made me think of the question, are they going to move the GSA scheduled things onto SAM? Just, I mean, I haven't heard of that, but your question made me think of that. If it's all about consolidation and they have all these GSA scheduled things that are kind of separate from some of the SAM based notice and procurement stuff, I wonder if there's a thought about revamping that. Again, I haven't heard anything like that, but it just made me think of that. And also, you always hear, I mean, at least we've always said that, task order requests for proposals don't normally end up on SAM. And so I wonder if there's going to be more, some sort of move to put them on SAM instead of just keeping it within the IDIQ holder. So that's just you've made me think of some interesting questions with your comment.
Yeah, Shane, I agree with that. I hadn't thought about that, but the whole world of opportunity notices that go exclusively to GSA contract holders. I'm not saying one way is better. I'm saying technically speaking, and just from an efficiency standpoint, boy, there's hundreds of thousands of people who must be calling people left or right saying, how come I can't see these opportunities, only to find out through phone calls and research and a lot of wasteful time. Well, you're only going to hear about that if you have a GSA contract. Whereas if it's on SAM.gov and it says you must have a GSA contract on this schedule, that would seem to be an efficiency that would save somebody researching that because they'll see it on SAM.gov. And it may save people on the government side from taking phone calls and responding to emails just to tell people over and over again, you have to have a GSA contract. So that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, although I could see more things going on to GSA schedules because they seem to have more flexibilities. So if the goal is more flexibility, then maybe some procurements will stay on a GSA schedule or move towards a GSA schedule, because that's obviously under GSA's, it's under GSA's jurisdiction already, and there's kind of this move towards consolidating things under GSA. So I could see that happening.
And they
even
could do
more.
both,
Yeah.
right? They could divert more purchases to the schedules, but announce them or allow the public to see them in a way that doesn't change that the competition is limited to schedule contract holders.
Yeah,
That would be
exactly. Yeah. Good point.
so.
Wow.
Priscilla, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. That makes sense. That all makes sense. All of you are very good at making your point, and I really appreciate it because it's information that people like me need to know, especially when I'm helping clients. The old way of doing it, and it's not even really that old, it's just a year ago, doing it, it's null and void. Now, not only do you have to have you've always had to have a SAM's account, but you have to go directly through SAM's. And once again, like Shane said, you'll see things on the GSA website for contractors that you won't see on SAM.
Right.
So if they consolidate it, maybe we'll see things, those same projects on SAM's website, and we'll be able to then go into GSA and apply for them, correct?
It could certainly happen. And I think, and I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want this to come across as political, and it's not intended that way. The idea being put forth by the administration is that transparency is valued. Whether or not that's the case is another thing. But I would think that hearing about GSA purchases on SAM.gov that are still GSA scheduled purchases would be more transparent rather than less transparent.
So is this going to apply to the DOD website?
A lot of the DOD purchases, most of them actually are showing up on SAM.gov. Is there a particular class of purchase that you're referring to?
No,
Okay.
I'm just wondering, since it's all government, it's all interconnected, I'm wondering, is everything from these other platforms or these other sites going to funnel into SAM's, and actually SAM will label it, DOD or, GSA or something like that? Is that going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I would suspect that would be open for, as a possibility. I can tell you that most purchases previously were going through SAM.gov, except for GSA as the stepchild or the outlaw cousin. I will say that, the government printing office has always had its own thing for printing projects, but I want to make sure, like, this is for the audience. Again, this is not for anybody as a panelist now, but SAM.gov is for federal opportunities only. And I just want to make the point that at the state and local level, it's the Wild West, and there are thousands of websites where those opportunities are published. And this would not generally affect those. Those would continue to be published, anywhere from a small school district's website up to a state portal for purchasing, for example. So Priscilla, please stay with us. We're going to take a few questions from the written Q&A section. So we have 3 there. And then Michael, I see that you raised your hand. If you'd like to come on after we take these, please keep it raised. And anyone else who wants to join us, please raise your hand, and at some point we'll bring you on. So the first question that was typed in is anonymous. It's okay. Do you think that tribal or Alaskan Native Corporation 8As will be affected by DOGE? That's a big question right there. Let me ask a different question, and then maybe we'll get back to that question. Shane, can you talk a little bit about what happened with the disadvantage designation under Trump 1 and what has happened and what has come through the court system over the last several years since Trump 1 around the idea of being disadvantaged? And then maybe we'll circle back to how may that affect 8A or tribal or Alaskan Native corporations?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. That's a big question, but I'll try to keep it.
The
I'll try to
eighth
hit the
grade
big
version,
picture.
the eighth grade version.
Yeah. So we've dealt with this a lot in our firm because we help a lot of companies that have either they just want a little help with their SPA certification process, or more commonly they have like a more complicated ownership structure or kind of history with the company or something like that where they need a little help explaining things to SBA. So, that's includes 8A, also Hub Zone and service disabled veteran small business and women owned small business. So within that 8A category, in 2000, I guess it's 2023 now, there was a court case that basically forced SBA to revamp and reorganize how you show social disadvantage for 8A purposes. And basically there's a statute that was implemented by Congress that said they want to Congress policy is to encourage procurements and contracts going to economically and socially disadvantaged companies or companies owned by economically and socially disadvantaged owners. And so that's in the statute. And then this court case came along and said, um, you can't presume that certain people are socially disadvantaged based on race and other categories. Based, and some of that, that wasn't a direct thing coming from the Trump administration since it came from a federal judge, but it's kind of in line with some other Supreme Court rulings. I kind of extended other Supreme Court rulings, and I'm not a Supreme Court scholar. We read about those things when they have an impact on federal contracting mainly, and so this was one of those. Um, Case called Ultima. But what it meant was that SBA said you can't just presume that someone's socially disadvantaged. So SBA updated their regs to say and updated their processes to say you have to show us, you have to show SBA how you were impacted by bias or discrimination based on could be race, could be gender, could be a disability, could be sort of an even maybe a physical characteristic that's not in one of those categories. And if you can show that and demonstrate that to SBA, then they will find that you're socially disadvantaged. So that was something our firm helped a lot of folks with, just getting through those new SBA policies and guidelines, and we're still doing that to this day because it's can be sometimes hard for people to kind of articulate that. um, so that's how that changed. And currently, one thing I will say as to your question, Nick, kind of how things have changed from administration to administration, I do want to point out that, when the new SBA administrator Loeffler came in, um, there's still SBA goals for small business and all those different categories I just mentioned, SD, VSB, woman owned, 8A and Hub Zone. Those goals are still there. It's not like they've removed those from the website. So those goals are still there. What was done through an executive order in early on, I guess I say early on, it's still early in the Trump administration, but in January, they said Biden had put in an executive order that raised the goals for 8A, or it also includes socially disadvantaged businesses, which, I don't want to go too far down that road, but you can self-certify as a small disadvantaged business if you're not going for prime contracts, and those could still meet the goals. But be that as it may, Biden had a executive order that increased those goals every year. And so it was going all the way up to 15%. Trump came in and said, we're getting rid of that executive order. So that had the effect of going down to what Congress said the goal had to be 5% minimum. So that's what it is. And that's still on the SBA website. And, that is still, we haven't seen anything to the contrary that says, they kind of said we're going to 5%. There was actually a bill introduced last year that it would have gotten rid of that socially disadvantaged language in the Small Business Act, but it never. I don't think it even came out of committee. So getting back to, there's a long way to get back to this question.
Yeah, and so the
Uh,
question, do you think that tribal or Alaskan Native Corporation 8As will be affected by DOGE? So let me ask this tangentially related question. And I think I know the answer, but I need to hear you say it if I'm right about it. Um, isn't it true that Native American and Alaskan Native corporations are automatically disadvantaged?
it's not, well, tribal organizations, it's not automatic. They have to show based on tribal, basically kind of the economics and the financial situation of the tribe, that there's social disadvantage within that tribe. So even that's not really automatic. Alaska Native corporations, I think, those are kind of established by statute and treaty. So there may be kind of, it's not real. I mean, maybe you could argue whether that's automatic or not, but it's sort of, the U.S. already agreed to it. So like back, decades ago when they said these Alaska Native corporations have these special status, it wasn't, yeah, it's like, is that automatic or was it because it's passed in a treaty slash statute? But yeah, they kind of don't have to. I don't think they have to reestablish that for ANCs,
Yeah, I mean,
because
I haven't heard anything
yeah,
specific from anyone that I would put it this way. Maybe this is the way to say it. There's nothing inherently that would affect a tribal or Alaskan Native corporation other than what may happen to 8A businesses generally. Like, would we agree on that?
yeah. There's nothing in these executive orders that's talking specifically about tribal or Native Hawaiian or ANC organizations. I think that's
So it would
where we
be
stand
like
now.
things for whoever asked this question, you would be looking for articles or news items that talk about disadvantaged in general or 8A in general, and anything that would affect those two terms of art would probably come into play.
Yeah, and actually, I was looking through those executive orders. You almost, if you read through them, they sort of don't say the word disadvantaged a lot.
Okay.
And so, but again, that's kind of how much can you read into that? Because they easily could have said, they talked about diversity, equity, inclusion. They don't say disadvantaged individuals or disadvantaged entities. So, um,
Well, in question for you, Shane, specifically, as seeing, because I came in when the new rule was, you have to do the narratives. Do you feel like the narratives, requiring them to do these narratives almost gives them more protection from things where it's like, well, you can't be awarded this just because of your gender or your race, where they can point to these narratives of here is why?
yeah, I think so. And it also kind of opened up the 8A program to more people, more business owners, because you know when I started working on this years ago, if you were, for instance, a white woman who wanted to get into the 8A program, but you had to kind of bend over backwards to really demonstrate many instances of bias and potentially maybe get a letter, documentation, attach emails, a letter from a coworker or something to um, corroborate what you're saying and back that up. And now it's kind of more open that if you can show it's kind of like the journalistic things, who, what, where, when, and why. If you can show those, then it's actually open up to more individuals that are wanting to get in the 8A program. So yeah, they have that in the record, like you're saying, Annie, and they can point to that. SBA can, but they also make it a little bit more available to different business owners.
Well, we have a different question here, so we're going to shift gears. Sean, I see you with your hand raised. After this question, we're going to bring you on. A question from Wade. And Wade, if you'd like to jump in with your audio or video, just raise your hand and I'll promote you. But we can certainly take the question this way. Wade says, we're hearing from customers who already won an NSF, National Science Foundation, maybe, grant, but aren't getting the money. Are you hearing of anyone who is challenging this Or is there any sense of how this situation might be addressed and or resolved? So hearing that from customers who already won an NSF grant but aren't getting the money. Do you folks deal with customers who have grants instead of contracts?
We don't very often. I mean, maybe I can count one time that we have dealt with a little bit of some grant work, and but we don't do it on a regular basis. It's mostly all contracts. I have heard of some lawsuits challenging that, but I haven't read through any of the pleadings or anything like that. But I know there's definitely people that are challenging those things, but I don't know where they stand now, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and also for our part, we're dealing primarily with contracts, not grants. So while there has been a lot in the news about grants and there are lawsuits around that, we would just encourage you to identify, and maybe I should propose this and maybe Shane or Annie can bless it. Maybe you should find out which lawsuits would be most applicable to your client situation and closely monitor those. What do you think of that, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, if it's, or you could see who those attorneys are and maybe even who are on or listed on those lawsuits and maybe reach out to them, or maybe they could get you a referral. If it's something where you really, a customer wants to get involved, then maybe you could find out who those attorneys are that way.
And thank you for your question, Wade. And I'm looking to promote Sean. So, oh, looks like Sean's joining us. And we do have a few more questions that were typed in, and we'll certainly get to those after Sean joins us. And Priscilla, you still owe me an answer to a question I haven't yet asked. We're going to get back to it. It's about spring or breaking a bone. But let me start with Sean. Sean, where are you joining us from, and what do you do?
I'm joining you from Houston, Texas, and I've been in industry, oil and gas, for almost 30 years, and then suddenly found myself not in the industry. So I started an LLC, and I'm looking to, find government contracts, local, county, state, anything around GIS, data management is my background.
Well,
So
I think you are someone we can help. But let me start with this question. Have you ever broken a bone? If so, how? Do you have a pet? How did it get its name? Or what makes you think spring is in the air? Pick any of the
Yeah.
above.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Maybe the same case as Shane. I've been skateboarding all my life, jumping out of planes, riding motorcycles. I've never broken a bone.
Wow.
I have a dog, a boxer named Changa. That's after
Cute.
Chimichanga, and we just shortened it to Changa. And spring's here, same thing. There's pollen everywhere, and luckily right now there's not leaf blowers, so you guys can hear me speaking.
And Priscilla, for your part, chime in.
Perfect. Okay, so I did break my neck. I used to be a gymnast. I've been doing gymnastics since I was 7 years old. So one day I decided at a much older age to do a back handspring and came down on the top of my head and cracked my neck. So I have broke a bone.
Ugh.
I wasn't paralyzed or anything. We're like rubber, believe it or not, humans are. But anyway, I survived fine. I did have a dog. I no longer have him. His name was Doug, and my son named him from the movie Up, the dog Doug.
Oh.
But
Nice.
yeah, so when I heard Annie, the name of Annie's dog, I automatically resonated with why you would name your dog that.
Yeah, that's funny. Doug is on my list for future dogs.
Oh, he was amazing. He was a poodle terrier. Amazing dog. Absolutely amazing.
Beautiful sentiment. So, Sean, what brings you to MyGovWatch Live, and what's on your mind?
Yeah, so Shane touched on it a little bit. So I started my LLC this year, and my wife and I are starting this business together. She's Hispanic, so I was curious, concerning in Texas, it's the historically under utilized businesses, the hub designation. Is it worth doing that? Should I pursue that? And what would she actually need to do to be involved in the business to justify having that designation?
Shane, do you folks work on the Texas Hub program, which is distinct from the federal program?
We don't, although that I can tell you, I mean, if you do want a referral, there are some good, I have a couple names for Texas attorneys. If you email me or something, I can send those over to you. I have seen that program. I mean, when you talk about state programs, the Texas one is one that you hear about. So some of our clients that do federal stuff have definitely also gone after and get awards through the Texas program. So it does seem pretty big and robust, but I don't work on the specifics of it. I just have it's that one and maybe New York or Virginia are some of the ones I've actually heard about, so it's pretty substantial, but I don't know the ins and outs of it, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say this, I'm not an expert on the Texas program, but as it relates to spouses, and I don't want to step too closely into the legal realm, but it's always been my understanding that the certifying body wants to see that the spouse is meaningfully involved in the business and may even be needed to show that the person is running the business. So I'm not sure if that's the litmus test in Texas, but yeah, they're generally not looking for situations where somebody appears to be involved in the business, and that's only on paper.
Yeah, I think the wording was materially involved. And
Mm.
if she's doing administrative work, doing taxes, and not necessarily the technical work of what the business would be doing, does that justify us having her as submitting for a historically underutilized business?
I don't know about Texas, but with federal, a lot of it, when it comes to materially involved, would more do with decision making. Does she have at the end of the day the final say and decisions over the company and then the day-to-day business operations, the management? At least in federal, that's kind of what we've seen mostly for her being involved in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Some of the federal programs do mainly look at the paper record, although they always have um, the kind of opportunity, no, maybe opportunity is not the right word. They always have the option to dig further, and they, at least like the service disabled veteran-owned small business program, it used to be pretty common. They would make site visits and kind of see where's the owner's desk, where's the office in relation to the entire building, that sort of thing. You don't hear about that as much, although I have heard some of those type of stories from the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, the DBE program, which is run by states. So what I'm saying is sometimes the states could even be more stringent than some of the federal review. And so you really would want to figure that out before you kind of dove into it.
Yeah, and
Sure.
I'm happy to send an email to Shane, you and Annie, and copy Sean. And if you want to make a referral, that would be my advice, Sean.
Yeah.
If Shane wants to make a referral, I would take him up on that.
All righty.
Yeah, we can do that for sure.
I do have a quick question real quickly. So what would be the easiest program to get into for new government consultants, excuse me, new government tech companies or government or companies that want to get in, tech companies that want to be a part of the government? Boy, I can't speak. What would be the easiest program to start with getting into?
Do you mean, and let me answer your question with a question. Do you mean special designation program, hub zone, disadvantage, or do you mean which part of government to serve?
What part of government I should,
Mm.
boy, yes. This is what it looks like or sounds like we've had too much coffee. I've been up since 4:30. So
No, it's fine. It's
a
fine.
lot of coffee.
Yeah. Let me just start with this answer, and then Shane and Annie can chime in. We did a survey last year. We sent out tens of thousands of emails to government buyers, and they answered a lot of questions that we had. And one question we asked was, where are you having trouble finding contractors? And we heard over and over again that government agencies at different levels, maybe not as much federally, but certainly at the state and local level, they're just having trouble finding contractors who can do IT work and do programming. When you think about it, there may be, and I think there are, maybe Shane and Annie can speak to this, but there are more constraints around where programmers can be then maybe some other work, right? There might be some domestic requirements around where the programmers can be. They may even flow down to the state and local level, but there's just so much competition for technical resources these days. We see it in our own business. Others on this call may see it as well. And we know that DOGE has an emphasis on using tech and using AI. I would say a company that has significant technical capabilities, really the sky's the limit. It doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. But if you have a client or a customer who has significant technical capabilities and they have real customers that they can point to as references, it's really just a matter of like, who do they want to work with? And then figuring out like, who do I need to talk to try to work with them?
Yeah. Or it could be this, is not too specific, but a lot of smaller companies when they're starting out sometimes work as subcontractors to larger IT companies. And that can be a way to get in there. Like maybe you only have like one or two people that work on the contract and then it's awarded to a larger company and then they get in as a subcontractor to that larger contractor. And that's a lot of our clients have started that way in the IT space and others too, other kind of industries as well, but definitely in the IT space.
Yeah, and taking that one step further, Priscilla, I think all of the federal departments have a contracting forecast that's generally available on their own website, where you can see like what are some of the contracting initiatives that they think are happening in the next year or two. Now, there might be a little bit more flux there with what's going on, but they still publish it. And then you could look at that list and see what's coming up that involves technology, and then wash that against, go to the usaspending.gov website and see what are the top IT contractors on that website for IT projects. And you can bet that if they're already a top 10 or a top 20 contractor for Department of Energy, and there's an IT contract coming up next year for Department of Energy, that's who your customer wants to solicit if they want to do subcontracting.
Okay, so I'm sorry, what was the website?
usaspending.gov.
Okay,
So that's a
thank you.
clearinghouse for historical federal spending.
Okay.
And you can look things up by NAICS code, by part of the country, right? And I would just encourage you to become familiar with that for your customers.
All right. You any?
So, Sean, a follow-up question. You're certainly welcome to stay with us. We're going to take a question from Jenna, who Jenna wrote a question to us. Any follow-up questions, Sean, before I go to Jenna? And then Michael Williams, we're coming to you right after that.
I'm good, thank you all.
Okay, stay with us. So Jenna says, my construction company works for NPS. NPS, Shane or Annie?
Is that National Park Service?
Okay, National Park Service. I've noticed that many contracts have been held off and then consolidated under a MATOC. Is this a trend you're seeing?
Oh,
I'm not sure I can speak to that
yeah.
one.
I would say yeah. Well, I would say yes. It's not only a trend, but it's kind of a policy that I've seen in some of the kind of press releases and executive orders and things like that. It's kind of literally saying they want to consolidate more contracts, at least in this administration, but it's happened in the Biden administration too. So that's kind of a continuation of a trend. And I've seen it with construction. We have a lot of clients that are under those MATOCs for, I mean, I guess I've seen it more with DOD agencies, and I can't remember as much with National Park Service, but it's definitely a trend in the construction world to do more of the MATOCs and less of the standalone. And then and then maybe they award like 5 to 10 awards for construction in a certain region, and then only those companies can compete for the task orders. So definitely seeing that as a trend. And some people kind of say there's problems with that, but it definitely seems to be the way that not the the prior administration and this administration are both making use of that. Or maybe it's not even the administrations, but the agencies are definitely making use of those MATOCs.
And Shane, wouldn't you agree that there's like sort of a tension between this idea that government should be efficient, right, by consolidating requirements, but there's also a concept around small businesses challenging things that are unduly bundled. And how often does that happen? And where do you see that going? If we're looking for efficiencies, that says to me fewer larger contracts. And how often do you have clients, or does it even happen where you have clients that challenge the bundling of requirements?
Yeah, we've done that occasionally, challenge that. It can be tough to challenge, but it can work in the right situation, and there's definitely the regulations say you can challenge it. But it's a little difficult. What I was thinking of though, there was, and we wrote about this on our blog, and I put that link in there. SBA came out with a question. They basically put this question into some of their pending regulation. They said, "Are too many projects going to mentor protege joint ventures?" And that's basically a large business teaming up with a small business in an approved relationship that SBA approves of, and then they kind of bundle their services together and their past performance and their capabilities in a joint venture, and then that joint venture bids, and it has sort of the qualities of the small business in terms of maybe it's an 8A or just a small business, but it combines the capabilities of a large business. And last year, I think it was, SBA said, are we are there too many of these mentor proteges, and they're sort of um, edging out all of the standalone small businesses. And SBA said, we want everyone to comment on that. And I thought it was very interesting that when they kind of came back, SBA did not mention what the results of those comments were. And so I don't know if that means, do we read that to mean that SBA is kind of moving away from that concern? And then they're going to be doing more of these consolidation things. And, they're kind of fine with the whole mentor protege joint venture idea. Um, it's definitely true that if you look through some of these big multiple award contracts, you see a lot of companies that say JV in the name.
Sure.
So it's definitely a move that a lot of companies are using, and seems to, I mean, it works out for them. Um, but then I think SBA was saying it's kind of like musical chairs. What if you don't have a good mentor and you're kind of left out? So that'd be the tension that Nick's talking about. It's kind of a few small businesses get pushed to the front because they have a good relationships with the larger companies, and then the rest are kind of making it's harder to compete.
Yeah, and this may be helpful to some of you in the audience who don't know what a mentor protege relationship is. This is a program. How long has it been around? Like 6 or 7 years now? This version of it?
Yeah, I think so. But it used
Yeah,
to just be 8As, and then they
right.
expanded it to all small businesses. Yep.
So basically, a small business can be mentored by another company, and that company would be in the same industry as the small business, and can offer all kinds of resources to the small business to help it grow and expand its capabilities in that industry. And the benefit to the mentor is that the mentor can own part of the protege and can do, I think it's a disproportionate amount of the work. I remember it was something like 60% of the work, is it not?
Right. It's 60. Yeah. So if it's kind of interesting. If it's in the services world, you normally can the non-small business can only do 50% max on the contract to get 50% of the dollars. Whereas if they're in a mentor protege joint venture together, the mentor can get 60%. So they get kind of a 10%, basically, yeah, 10% bump or a 10% benefit from being in this mentor protege arrangement. And then there's a legal benefit because if you're in an approved mentor protege agreement, you kind of, the rules sort of says you don't have to really worry about affiliation and being found that the two companies are working too closely together, and then the small business loses its small business status. So it's definitely, there's this kind of monetary incentive, and then there's the legal risk um, insulation, you could call it. You kind of get a shield from some legal risks that that's very very beneficial to the large company and the small company.
Yeah, and so mentor protege federally is definitely something that that you should look into if you're a small business, particularly if you have ties to a much larger business that also is interested in federal contracts. So, Michael, we're going to bring you on. Let's hope you're not getting a cup of coffee. Here comes Michael. And then Victoria, I see your question. We're going to come to you next. And Michael's coming in. We're getting a picture. There he is. We just need your audio, Michael.
What about now? Can you hear me?
All right, we can hear you, Michael. Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. What do you do and where are you joining us from?
All right, I'm joining you from Haymarket, Virginia, just about 45 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. And I started as an LLC for Team Vet, and that stands for Transitioning Empowerment for Active Military to Veteran. And looking to work with veterans who are transitioning out, who I've spoke to hundreds and hundreds. I'm a veteran myself, and the transition process does not put most veterans in a good place to be prepared to get back into the civilian world. So we offer a comprehensive suite of about 12 services, anywhere from mental health, we have yoga, nursing advocacy, nutritionist, resume writing, employment assistance, just so we can start working with them prior to their transition and be able to help them make it a seamless process. And we still work with veterans who are already out and are having difficulties understanding what benefits they are entitled to and what services they're entitled to, because there are lots of them. They're hard to understand, and a lot of veterans, believe it or not, don't know half of what their entitlements are, once they cross the line into the civilian world. So we hope to bring that to light and work with our transitioning service members and be able to put them in a better place once they get into the civilian world.
Well, thank
And
you for doing what you do for veterans, and kudos to you for serving the veteran community. And before we go further, Michael, take your pick. Do you have a story where you broke a bone? Do you have a pet, and how did your pet get its name? Or what makes you know spring is in the air?
I can answer all three of those. Let me just
You don't have to phone a friend?
no. Well, let's start with the broken part. While I was in Singapore, we were on a ship, and everyone got off, and I'd stopped playing basketball for like 7 years because Michael Jordan retired. And the young kids were like, "Come on, old man, you say you used to be able to play basketball. Come on." First play of the game, went up for a rebound and fell on my knee. I mean, something broke, something popped. Anyway, I was shipped back to San Diego. I was told I had the best um, doctor on the West Coast for the Navy, and he put the parts in wrong. So
Oh,
for a year and a half, I didn't heal because the parts were inverted. Ended up going to New York. The Dr. McCullough, who does the Giants and Yankees and all those, he ended up pulling all those parts out, putting new parts in. This is the left knee. So 2 knee surgeries in less than 2 years. And he told me if anybody else has to go in that knee in the next 25 years, it would need to be amputated. So while I'm being careful on this knee, I'm wearing the right knee out. And I had a microfracture surgery over there in an OATS procedure where they take the ligaments and tendons from a deceased healthy person and put them in. That was supposed to last 8 years. It lasted 5. And I just had this knee replaced in August of 2022. Now,
hearing all of this, Michael, I still have to say you could probably still take me in basketball.
no, I gave up basketball. So now no high impact activities at all. So
Oh,
what all
wow.
this has done for me, it has helped my golf game tremendously.
Oh,
Well, then we
Because
might have a wager on that, but not on the basketball. You would beat me because
right,
the last time I played basketball 20 years ago, I had a shot blocked by a lady who was shorter than me, and I said, "This is not something I need to do anymore." Um,
Nick.
so, Michael, what's on your mind?
Well, I joined today, and we talked yesterday. I really wanted to know how the whole contract process works and what it would look like for me, because when I first started as an LLC, it was really hard to gain traction. Now, operating as a nonprofit and getting everything together, and my whole vision was on working with the Department of Labor, the Veterans Administration and Department of Defense, because those are your big agencies that are involved in the transition process. But with everything going on, I don't know how that looks now. So I'm focusing more on state uh, grants and contracts and other veteran companies that I can kind of get under, like we were talking about earlier, and let them kind of show me the way and be able to work off of them until we can get our name out there and be a little bit bigger than what we want to be, than what we are now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so it sounds like you don't have any specific experience with federal contracts and that this would all
Right.
be new.
Yeah,
So
this
did
is
you
new.
create an account on SAM.gov yet?
I do have one on SAM.gov. Yeah.
Okay. Was that easy, or like how long did it take you to get that done? Because it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And the hardest part was when I submitted it, it kept coming back that there was an error. I didn't mark myself as a small business, but I did. And when I finally got that part complete, I was trying to sign up over at the SBA for veteran, get the whole veteran status, and it kept telling me that my NAICS codes were off. So we kept going back, deleting, put some on, and it
Mm.
was just a very, very long process. It's almost like they were trying to tell me, nope, we're not going to do this. And when you call for help, they can't really help you out because they say, well, you got to go back to SAM because there's an error in your record over there. And when you get that fixed, come back over here. Well, you talk to SAM, whenever you can get them online, it's like, well, it looks like everything's okay, and we'll resubmit it. So you got to wait for it to come from Fort Belvoir or wherever they do the work at. Uh, and and it was just a long process. But I think this is my calling, so patience has been tested, but I think I have to have it to keep going.
And how do you envision helping veterans with contracting?
Well, so having the VA and their resources, the Department of Defense, their resources, Department of Labor, if I can access the veterans 12 to 18 months prior to them getting out and really focus on their mental health and the transition for them, their families and caregivers, there may be special needs in there, and help them, get the right resources you need for the area you're going to. So if they give us a zip code and they say, I'm not going to be in this area, I'm moving over here, we can start working on that process now. We can find the companies that are interested in hiring veterans. We can also work with TRICARE and get those doctors who've worked with those doctors and practitioners who've worked with veterans in the past and have a good record and a good rapport, instead of getting some that may not understand what that service member's been through, especially when it comes to mental health, because you kind of deal with a different animal. Because men and veterans, we kind of think that, oh, we're bigger than this, we don't need to have this. And we want to make sure when they get in the community, they're actually a part of the community and they're not afraid to go out because someone's looking at them different. So we're going to prepare the resumes with professional resume writers, and then we're going to look for those companies. And at the same time, while we're doing all that, we have yoga instructors who are going to work with people who are interested in yoga, and our health and wellness coaches who will follow them and the diets that they're on, and how they're keeping their health good. It really should be health maintenance, but we're going to try to make sure that they're healthy going out, and teach them how to be healthy going forward. Because a lot of people get out of the military, you want to kind of just let yourself go. Well, we don't want to do that. We want them to be the best version of themselves that they can be, and still be active in the community and do the things that they want to do. Because just because you're taking off this uniform, it doesn't mean that your life is over. It doesn't mean that your career is over. It doesn't mean that you can just go home and call it quits,
I'm
because at that point it's not healthy for you.
My father is a veteran, a disabled veteran from the Vietnam era, and he didn't take advantage of his benefits until probably the late 90s into the early 2000s. So I know exactly what you're talking about. Are there any specific questions we can answer for you, Michael?
I've just been listening at this point because
Yeah.
I'm getting close to, we're getting our CRM as for the nonprofit. That should be up next week. And we got everything else set up. And at that point, we're really looking for some donors. We're going to start searching for contracts. And I have a person that specifically is going to be looking for and understanding contracts and know exactly what we're looking for. So I guess just understanding the language right now and
Well,
understanding
yeah, I
what
mean,
what the
so
forecast
here's
looks
what I
like.
would recommend. I mean, we're not ending the session anytime soon. We're budgeted an hour and a half, but it may go over depending on questions. Stay with us on the panel. I'm going to take a question from Victoria now. Victoria typed a question. And folks, if you're still with us in the audience, now is a good time to raise your hand if you have anything that you would like to talk about in the next 20, 30 minutes, and we can definitely address it. So Victoria's question is, how is the advertising, specifically branding promotional items, seen like? How can a branding promotional items minority owned, locally based in Massachusetts get both state and federal contracts? Victoria, great question. I will tell you that advertising and then branding and promotional items is a very run-of-the-mill purchase at the federal, state, and local level. So the US government printing office has their own website where they publish what they're buying. We track advertising as a category on MyGovWatch.com. We track graphic design and printing as separate categories as well. So leaving the minority owned part out, I suspect just on the basis of your capabilities, you would see an awful lot of stuff on MyGovWatch. And this is just one promo. Anybody who asks a question on these sessions qualifies for a 1-month trial at MyGovWatch. So if you go to the website, it shows as a 2-week trial, but because you asked the question, we bump that out to 30 days before the card is charged. So you would have like 30 days just to see what the scene is like, so to speak. And then we have another question from an anonymous attendee who says they're in the construction and painting industry, really excited about pivoting from residential and commercial work to government contracts. What companies in the Bay Area, California, if any, can mentor your company? So I would also say to that person, there's an awful lot of projects in the state of California at the federal, state, and local level around painting, which is its own category, and construction, which is a category, so you can be a sub to those vendors. I would also encourage you to just create an account and take a look. Spend a month just looking at projects, and we can interact offline on how you would use the leads from our site to find out who the prime contractors are. Because if you can identify who the prime bidders are on contracts in California, companies that are winning state or local contracts, boy, that would make a fantastic mentor for federal mentor protege opportunities. So hopefully that answers that question. And then we have another question from someone in painting. This is Patrick with Integrity Painting. I also have a question about NAICS codes. I'm enrolled with SAM.gov. If I'm searching for contracts and I find one that matches the type of work we do, but don't have the right NAICS codes, can you add those codes at a later date to qualify for specific contracts? Shane and Annie, could you take that one, please? I mean, I can speak to it, but feel like I'm dominating the session now.
Sure. Well, I would just say, yeah, you can update your SAM at any time to add those NAICS codes. And I will say also for particular, if it's like a prime contract, um, yeah, you should have those. I mean, you should have the NAICS code match up. But really, a lot of the prime contracts are looking at your past performance. So rather than just I don't want to say like don't worry about the NAICS codes. You should make them match up, but it may be more concerned about your past performance and showing those examples if it's a particular solicitation you're going after. But yeah, you can add those codes in. You can update your SAM pretty much at any time, and even the rules say you're supposed to update it to keep it accurate as often as needed, no less than once a year. So you should definitely update that. Annie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and I will say somebody had a question about mentor. In addition to Nick's ideas, which are really good for looking for particular people, we get that question all the time. We don't have there's no easy answer, but industry days, and that could be federal industry days or local construction similar type things, conferences and industry days, and kind of going through traditional networking is what we always recommend for finding a mentor, because sometimes it's just making the right connection, and sometimes you got to use all those tactics and all the information you can get, and sometimes it's just the one personal connection, sometimes it's finding the professional connection, sometimes it's finding someone in person. Any of all of those could work, and finding that right person that you have a good mesh with can be the way to find a mentor that could work with you.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Shayna. I guess one additional question that I'd like to ask, and I don't know if you've thought about this or you've seen anything about this, but I remember seeing something about you can't propose a new regulation without eliminating, I think it was 3 or 4. I can't remember what was announced. Is there a part of the FAR that you feel would be more likely to be eliminated? Maybe it's not, maybe its time has come and gone where it's not relevant, or there's just some aspect to it where it's just not as useful as it used to be. Is there any part of the FAR that you would think would be more likely to be on the chopping block than any other?
Hmm.
And maybe the answer is just no.
Yeah, I'm sure there are um, some extraneous things. I can't think of one in particular. Maybe there's some that have been around for a long time. I always think of like, so we get in our practice, one of the things we work on, a lot of things connected with federal contracting. One of them is if you're selling your company and you have to novate your contracts, you basically have to get government approval. And I'm always the basic process is you have to go to a particular contracting officer, fill out particular paperwork that's prescribed by the regulation, and show them that it's in the best interest of the government. But there's no deadline. There's no required response by the government. I always think that area, that FAR provision about novations and name changes has not been updated in like 30 years. So they could probably streamline that. Could they maybe just put in at least like a suggested time frame for response? Maybe it's 60 days, 90 days, 3 months, whatever it is. Make that process a little bit more streamlined. So that's definitely one area. And I bet there's others similar like that where it could be, you could cut the whole process down. You're not eliminating the regulation. I think it's in the government's interest to not say you can just transfer a contract whenever you want, no questions asked. But could they streamline it and make it sort of a easier to follow process? And then contracting officers would kind of know, okay, it's I kind of have a deadline here. It obviously I can go past it, but let's make it a little bit more streamlined for people if they're selling their company or selling a contract.
Yeah, I've come across people in the past who are just terrified at what happens to their federal contract if they try to sell the company, who may have, disproportionate amount of their business in federal contracts. And it's something that they often they won't even consider selling their company because they're just not sure what will happen. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. Is the little open ended, is it not?
Yeah, or if it could say the government must give a reason for rejecting it, and then maybe people feel more comfortable. Okay, maybe they can reject. They don't. I mean, most of them get approved, but the timing is so discretionary. Putting a little bit more guide rails on it. It still says you have to provide 3 paper copies, and no one has done that for probably 20 years, but it's still in the regulation. So I'm sure there's many other examples like that where it could just be update a little bit, keep the idea, but make it all more streamlined. I wrote about all this organizational conflict of interest is actually one where and that's I know it's totally going off in a different tangent, but the idea that you can't kind of be on both sides of a deal when you're dealing with federal contracting, that actually has been revamped and kind of streamlined and they kind of expanded it a little bit because it was one area where it was very vague and all the rules were just made by judges, which is kind of hard for contractors because I mean they have to read. They don't always want to have lawyers read through a dozen cases to tell them what to do. That one there's a proposal out there. They're making it a little bit more defined. They're actually adding text, which can be helpful in some situations like that. So those are the 2 areas that just thought of off the top of my head.
Well, that's certainly helpful for the audience, um, and for me as well. I will say this: I thought when people started signing up for this event, we had a record number of signups for this event. I thought maybe people would have us on this session for like 2 hours, guys. We may be coming to an organic ending place at some point very soon here. So I'm just going to do like a last call, and then I'm going to ask you another question. I'll ask you both another question. So now would be the time, folks. If you have any other questions, raise your hand. We'll bring you on and we'll get your question in. But did you at least ever almost break a bone? And how about you, Annie? Any broken bones?
Oh wait, we lost your, or I can't hear the sound.
Yeah.
Can you hear it, Nick?
No, no audio, Annie. Work on that. How about you, Shane? How
Oh,
did you almost break a bone?
well, yeah, I've definitely had stitches before. I actually, on my 5th birthday, I must have been very excited about some presents or something. I tripped and I basically cut my nose open and had to go to the hospital on my birthday and get a
Ah,
little. That's like back when, I don't know if they still do this. They give you a little make the latex glove into a balloon, put a little face on it. So that they give you to make the kids feel better when they're at the hospital on their birthday. I still remember that. That was a nice thing to do. Made that
Okay,
birthday
can
very
y'all hear
memorable.
me?
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm back.
So for my part, the only broken bone I've had is I had a motorcycle accident once 20 years ago. I was just between gigs and and I didn't have health insurance and I had a kid on a bicycle as I was slowing down to a red light. T-boned me with his bicycle and I went flying and he went flying. He was fine. His bike wasn't. And I had a broken collarbone. And then I decided, being the consultant I was at the time, I could type and I just didn't go see a doctor. And here I am 20 years later with no ill effects from a broken collarbone with no medical
Wow.
treatment whatsoever.
Yeah.
So we have one more question here from Sandy.
Oh,
Is it easier for a company pursuing government contracts for the first time to start with local contracts before state and federal ones? Great question, Sandy. I'll start. If Shane and Annie have any comments, they can chime in as well. Yes and no. Never let anyone tell you that there is one way to get into government contracting. Certainly, is there a greater likelihood that you could pick off a small local contract for what you do? Yeah, that's probably more likely, all things being equal, that you would just land a federal contract. However, depending on what you sell, there are federal thresholds below which they might even use a credit card, depending on what you're selling. And maybe they don't have to ask anybody for approval because it's below a certain amount. Um, but by and large, certainly local, may be a little bit easier than federal, and you go up the food chain, state and then federal. But not knowing what you do specifically, and we could maybe talk offline if you're using our site already, and we should. Yeah, yeah. There's no one way to get into contracting, and so just avoid the temptation of saying that there's only one way to do it. So hopefully that helps. And we have a question from. Well, we had a hand up. I'm not sure if it's staying up, but Shane and Annie, any additional thoughts about that item?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Me and Nicole, who was supposed to be on this call, um, how we were talking to a client recently and didn't have any past performance experience. And, in federal contracting, that's something that it can be looked at and evaluated before awarding you a contract. And so really just getting your foot in the door anyway to just build up that past performance. And we had tossed around ideas, and one of them too was even just finding a prime that you could subcontract under just to get some form of experience, see which might be easier for you and your business, just to keep building up that resume and making it easier for future awards.
For sure. For sure.
yeah. Good
I
point.
don't think we have any other questions. I just want to do one more thing, guys, and then we're just going to wrap it up. It'll end up being exactly or almost exactly 90 minutes. I want to go to, if I were to just show a screen, should I show the small GovCon screen or should I show the firm screen?
I'd say
We
the
want
small
Small
GovCon.
GovCon, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me go to that and I want to share it.
Shameless plug.
Oh, that's the point. And that's one of the reasons why we do the format that we do. So many webinars are, educational, but you can't promote. Well, we're here to promote what we do, and that includes the audience as well. So let me just share this real quick.
Well, and any resources that people can get and try on their own to understand things before taking those next steps is always helpful too.
Okay, so this is smallgovcon.com. This is a site operated by the firm, and I certainly encourage everyone watching now or watching online later, to go sign up for the newsletter that the folks associated with the firm and the website produce, because it just covers everything you would ever want to know as it relates to important federal contracting issues and things coming up and things happening that may affect your business. So I can't recommend it highly enough. Go sign up for the newsletter. Should we mention that you all are both on LinkedIn, and is that the best way to get in contact with you? Or, knowing this will be on YouTube later, is there anything else that you would like to say about how people should contact you?
Yeah, I would say either calling us or emailing at info@koprince.com. Email is probably the best way. If you you can definitely follow us on LinkedIn. I sometimes put a few extra updates on LinkedIn when I just see something that's interesting. Sometimes even something that Nick has put together, we will put that on LinkedIn. So I would say definitely follow us on LinkedIn if you just want lots of information. If you actually have a specific question, call or use the info@koprince.com. And then sometimes, you will end up doing a call with you and you may become a client. Sometimes we can just get you a resource. Often it's one of our own blog posts and we can send that to you. And some people can really get some help out of it that way. And if you end up using us for legal services, that's, also great too, because we can get you good advice and we can help you out that way.
Well, fantastic. Shane, Annie, it doesn't look like there are any other questions. So I'll say that will do it for today's edition of MyGovWatch Live. Remember, if you're not already a subscriber, start your free 14-day trial today at mygovwatch.com. If you want to win more government contracts for less, you'll be glad you did. Shane and Annie, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep.
Great to
See
be
you
here.
later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.